Good morning, everybody. My name is Sam Solomon, and this is Signal Tower. Today's guest is Jason Shen. Jason is the founder of RideJoy, the author of Winning Isn't Normal. He's a national champion gymnast from Stanford. He's got a popular blog called The Art of Ass Kicking. I'm sure there's like a million other things I'm forgetting. In this interview, we'll learn why RideJoy failed and what Jason will do differently at his next business. We'll talk about the value of keeping a blog. And we'll talk about why you should travel by yourself. This is going to be a long interview, so let's go ahead and get started. Jason, welcome to the show. If you would, introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me on here. So a little bit about me, I guess. The most notable thing I've done is started a company called RideJoy. It was a long-distance ride-sharing marketplace. We were funded by Y Combinator in the summer of 2011, and we helped tens of thousands of people share trips all across the United States and Canada. I studied biology at Stanford, where I was also on the gymnastics team, and we had the good fortune of winning a national championship while I was there. What else? I write a blog called The Art of Ass Kicking, and I've been doing that since 2010. A lot of fun. It's all about conquering fear, building strength, and making things happen.
All right. You're also have recently written a book?
That's right. I published a book called Winning Isn't Normal, which is a collection of my best blog posts over a number of years, carefully edited, collected together, and in the sort of three fields of mind, sort of strengthening your mindset, mastering yourself there. Body, which is about like health, fitness, my experiences with running and gymnastics, and work, which is around startups, around being more effective in groups, around just getting shit done. So very, very excited to take a stab at the, Kindle marketplace. Been very fun and great to get my book out there and see people enjoying it.
Absolutely. Well, let's start by talking a little bit about RideJoy. So RideJoy was a ride-sharing, kind of program. What made you want to start RideJoy or a company?
Sure. So before I started RideJoy, I was living in San Francisco, working at a startup called iSocket. It was an ad tech company. I was living with two other guys, Calvin Wang, Randy Pang. I knew Calvin from college. And Calvin and I actually started a nonprofit while I was at Stanford called Gumball Capital. And that's what first turned me on to the realization that I could get involved in entrepreneurship. I loved technology. I remember making websites as a kid and in GeoCities and all that stuff and messing around with Photoshop. But when I took my CS classes in high school and in college, I never did that well. And I felt that coding, programming wasn't my strong suit, so maybe there wasn't much of a role to play. But Gumball Capital helped me understand that there were these other skills, other roles that I could play and be valuable. So fast forward to San Francisco, I've been working at the startup for some time. I wasn't that happy. There's just a little bit of I wanted to figure out what was next. Calvin had just spent about a year and a half working at a startup, and he had just left. And then Randy was working at a startup, and Randy was our third roommate. He was an engineer from Berkeley. So we had all become friends over the past year living together, and we kind of looked at each other one day and said, wouldn't it be pretty awesome if we could start something together? We're friends. We have different skill sets. Calvin was a CS major at Stanford, and I was more of an outgoing, kind of salesy, businessy kind of guy. So maybe the three of us can get together and do something cool.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, so now you've started this company. Kind of what were the very, very early days like? So after you guys decided, all right, you're going to be the sales guy. How did you go about getting your resources? Like, I guess, for young entrepreneurs out there, what is really the first step?
We were really lucky. We've been reading Paul Graham's essays for forever. Paul Graham is the partner and sort of founder of Y Combinator, this startup accelerator in Silicon Valley. So we knew if we were going to start something, we wanted to apply to Y Combinator. We had friends who had gone through YC, and it just seemed like a really great experience for internet founders. And so we started preparing our application. And we applied with one idea that we personally really liked. It was called Relove It. It was about rediscovering content that you had already liked, that you had already shared on your social network. So maybe you liked this YouTube video 6 months ago, we bring it back to you because you probably forgot about it and it's still awesome. They wanted to, when we applied with this application, we didn't even have much of a product. This is not really the recommended approach, but this is what we had. And they said, look, we like you guys, we don't like this idea. Come interview with us, but come prepared to talk about new ideas. So a week later, in this week, we were scrambling to come up with new ideas. We talked about something that was a precursor to RideJoy. Calvin lived in Saratoga, which is in the South Bay of Silicon Valley, so it's about an hour and 20-minute drive from San Francisco. And he had some friends who lived down there, and they were always trying to coordinate rides. So it wouldn't be great to find a way that you could coordinate or share rides with other people who were going down to the South Bay.
Right.
But then we shelved that, and we ended up pitching an idea around photo books and printing photo books of your best content, kind of like an auto-generated yearbook on a Facebook. And the interview went okay, and then they called us back and they said, yeah, we're going to take you, and we were super excited. And we found out later that they'd written in their notes, super enthusiastic founders fund for the new idea, which we thought it meant, fund for the new idea that we pitched them, but actually it meant fund for the idea that they're going to come up with in Y Combinator after they ditch this idea that is not that good. And that's like finding out like a prophecy, man. It was crazy.
It's like, yeah, you're the one. You don't know anything in the future. You don't know what your future is, but you're the one.
Right. So then we spent another 3 weeks in the first part of YC sitting around our apartment, Googling crap, trying out random apps, like downloading stuff. We were looking into OBD ports, which plug into your car and then tell you information about your car. So maybe we could build like the App Store ecosystem for your car and all these random things. And then finally, we started to really look into ride sharing as a long distance thing, because you would look on Craigslist. So Craigslist has this ride share section, and you could see people saying, I want to go to LA, I'm driving to Seattle, or I need a ride, help me find a ride. It was really disorganized, and yet there were 100 to 150 posts a day in the summer in the Bay Area. And that's what we call a proxy for demand. You don't necessarily know that people will need your service, but you can say, look at Craigslist, it's awful, and yet all these people are using it. There's something there. So that's when we decided we wanted to put our stake in the ground, do ride share, and then we were really off and running. So I think your question is about what you do next. So we really have this idea. What do we do? One of the first things we did was really talk to the people who ride share, because clearly we felt that this was valuable in a lot of ways, and this was important, and Calvin had wanted to share rides and shared rides with friends. We've all carpooled, but we hadn't done this sort of anonymous ride sharing, long distance kind of thing. What are the dynamics? How do people think about this? And so what I did is I cold called about 50 people who had posted their phone number on the Craigslist rideshare section at some point in the last couple weeks, and just called them, and I said, hey, I got your number off Craigslist. He's like, yeah, that was like last week. I'm in LA now. You're like, yeah, I know. But I wanted to ask you some questions about rideshare. We're working on this project to make rideshare better. Do you have like 10 minutes? And most people would say yes. And so then I would sit down and say like, well, how did you know to do rideshare? What have your experiences been like? Do you drive? Do you ride? How much do you pay? All this stuff. And I had this whole spreadsheet with all these different people and what they said. And that helped create a lot of the groundwork for what we were doing. Meanwhile, we had decided that one of the best things we could do is find some way of jump starting this marketplace, right? We were creating a marketplace that had drivers and passengers, and they needed to be starting in the same place, going to the same place on the same day. And that's a lot of different pieces to match on. If you're on eBay and you've got a Xbox that you're selling,
right,
that's it. You just need a buyer. They can be anywhere. Time doesn't matter so much as, you'd like to do it at some point in the next couple of months, but it doesn't have to be on this day. And it's not like if you list it and then doesn't sell, it's gone and evaporates, right? You still have the Xbox, but a ride goes away. It only exists for this period of time. So there are a lot of places where you had to match. Calvin had gone to Burning Man the year before in 2010. Burning Man is a festival in the deserts of Nevada. 50,000 people come to the desert for 1 week. There's art, there's music, there's dancing, there's a lot of creative expression, and these people were already kind of primed to share so it's a specific date, it's a specific location. So all you needed to do was match on where people were starting.
Right.
So we built a website called BurningManRides.com, started promoting that to people who were going to Burning Man. Sort of a parallel to the work that I was doing, developing this, understanding the customer.
So that was kind of like your MVP. It was like just kind of testing the waters, seeing how it worked out. And so what were the results of it?
So we got lucky again, and we made a site that really felt like it was made for burners by burners. It got picked up by the Burning Man Facebook group, so they shared it on their page, and they had 250,000 followers. So we got up to 2,000 likes. We got a lot of shares, and people started signing up. We launched it on August 1st, which is already kind of late, given that August, 20 something was Burning Man. It was right around Labor Day weekend, but in a couple weeks we got up to 1,600 registered signups. This was all through Facebook Connect, so you just connected with Facebook, and then 1,200 rides were posted. So that some of those were ride offers, some of those were ride requests, and then a lot of messaging was just happening on the site as well.
Wow, so after that you're like, this has got to be it. Now we've actually got to build a piece of software around this. Right.
It was one of the things that Y Combinator says is that you really, you go through this 10-week program where they give you weekly dinners and they bring in speakers and they sort of help you prepare, give you some money. And at the end of the day, you are presenting in front of hundreds of the best investors in Silicon Valley. And you've got to have that chart that is up and to the right.
The hockey stick.
We were fortunate to have rapidly grown the number of rides on our site to have that chart and to have a story. Airbnb was the breakout success in 2011. They were finally seeing that big success that they've continued to receive in 2014. But we made a lot of comparisons saying both. It's just kind of suggesting that with eBay, with Airbnb, with ride sharing, these were all markets where you might have not believed that people would do it before this. There's a lot of trust involved. It's not an area that had traditionally been successful, but we were going to do this. And I think that story resonated with investors. We ended up going to Burning Man ourselves. And then so after demo day, we went out to start fundraising, and we started working on the city, the California version, where we were helping people go to LA and to Seattle and to Portland and things like that.
And so I guess at that point in time, you guys had to be thinking, how do we monetize this, or was that a thought?
I think monetization, of course, with the marketplace is the ultimate move. I think we were thinking monetization actually pretty early, which meant that we were thinking we should build a payment system, we should get that transactions, we should do all this stuff. Because right now, with rideshare, a lot of it happens in cash and at the gas station maybe. So we were thinking about that very early on, but we were saying that it was going to take us a couple months to build the payment system.
Right.
And one of the mentors at at YC said, actually, why don't you just release a basic version with just messaging and figure out payments later? You need to get growth. You need to make mistakes, figure things out, and don't worry about payments if that's going to slow you down from getting in the market. So we took his advice, which is good advice, and we launched with just messaging, no payments, and that was fine. That was fine. Like, people could use it. So, and in retrospect, I think that if we had driven harder for growth and spent less time thinking so much about payments, I think we thought payments were really important. We thought transactions would be a differentiator between our product and using Craigslist.
Right.
And we really pushed for it. Not saying that it would have changed the game at the end of the day, but I think it would have I think that in retrospect, growth mattered more.
All right, so eventually RideJoy, didn't work out.
Yeah.
When did you know that it wasn't going to work?
So it kind of came in a couple stages. So we were funded in October, November of 2011. We raised $1.3 million, which is really exciting. I've never seen a bank account that's associated with myself in any way with that many zeros on it. And it's also very intimidating because these people are saying, here's just money because we think you can help us turn this into way more money. And then we started hiring people. We hired a community manager. We hired a designer. We hired an iOS engineer. So a couple of things that we wanted to do is we wanted to build an iPhone app. We wanted to improve our community because we thought that having a strong community would help people feel more comfortable ride sharing. I started doing a lot of business deals around events. I mean, it wasn't really a deal. The deal was we wanted them to promote a custom event-based rideshare. So we had make a site like ridejoy.com/Maker Faire, right? And Maker Faire would promote this to their audience, and that would help us get distribution, and they would have this offering. And then we started designing this iPhone app, and that's where we poured a lot of our product hopes and dreams into it. We felt that the website was great and all, but the iPhone app was going to be this amazing experience. We were growing about 25-30% a month throughout this whole process. So, around let's say our peak was maybe July, August. We were getting maybe 300 new ride posts a day. We were out in many, many cities. We were doing a lot of stuff with Craigslist to promote our site. So we were posting these calendars of rides on Craigslist as a way to organize the ride sharing section because it's very disorganized.
Right.
And people would see those calendars and then they'd find out about RideJoy. We'd allow people who posted rides on RideJoy to repost something to Craigslist to draw more eyeballs. So we're doing a lot of different things, growing. And we released our iPhone app in August. And there's a spike in new users. We did some advertising, but the iPhone app doesn't seem to be drawing in new users, right? It was briefly in the top 25 in the travel section, but it just wasn't. It wasn't something people were going out there and finding, even though we did a lot of great press. And right around that time, right after we launched the iPhone app, we had also been thinking, what do we need to do? This money's going to run out eventually. We're going to need to raise another round. We had implemented payments by this point. But the problem was people weren't really paying. People were switching. We gave them the option of doing credit card and or cash. Sometimes people would switch to cash only. We made these options that were credit card only, credit card or cash only. People would switch from credit card or cash to cash only. Drivers would. Drivers I don't even want people to pay with credit card. I don't want to receive a check or a PayPal payment. Right. I just want cash. And I'm not worried that people aren't going to, we still think that new people who are using the service would be concerned about getting paid and knowing that the person's really going to show up.
Right.
But there's always this dichotomy between the users who are used to the system and who are sort of power users and like new people. And designing for both groups is challenging. So we've been thinking, what do we need to do to raise another round? At that point, we had maybe $700,000 in the bank. We said, that's going to last us for maybe 13 months. To raise a Series A, it often takes about 6 months between all the pitching, the due diligence, everything. Might take up to 6 months. So in 7 months, we need to hit the road and start pitching. So what are we going to look like in 7 months? And we started, making stuff up, right? You start saying, okay, we're growing 25, 30% a month. What if we were growing at 35 or 40% a month? What if we were converting a lot better in terms of payments and we really focused on that? And we could be getting this many rides a day. We could be making this much money. They started talking to investors and getting a feel for whether or not that was fundable as a Series A. And we talked to a couple people, and we heard everything from no way, I have companies who are making $1 million a year and they're not going to get funded, to you're on the bottom end of maybe, it's possible. And so we said, okay, there's a chance, this whole thing's a long shot. So, and then maybe like a week or two after we released the iPhone app, we got a letter from Craigslist. It was a cease and desist. Craigslist terms of use is fairly, it has certain stipulations. So you're not supposed to scrape Craigslist listings to harvest them and put them on your own site, which we were doing. You weren't supposed to encourage people to post to Craigslist from a third-party app, which we were encouraging them to do. And you weren't really supposed to post things that were not directly related to the section that you were posting. We weren't posting rides in the rideshare section. I mean, we were aggregating rides, but, then we were also linking to ourselves and promoting ourselves. So, we had some friends who also got cease and desists from Craigslist. They were in a different section doing other things. And they said they spent $10,000 on legal fees, and turned out that they still had to cease. And so we said, I guess we have to cease. So that was like kind of the first point. And then we said, okay, we told the team, look, we've always known that we need to get off Craigslist. We need to grow to other channels. We've been working to grow to other channels. Didn't quite get there. Now we need to really think about what's next for the business, right? We just lost about 50% of our new user growth. We were trying to grow at more than 25, 30% a month. And now we're not even close, right? There's no, how are we going to make that up? So we spent 2 weeks and we said, let's brainstorm pivots. And I think of a pivot as something that's in a related field, right? When you think of a pivot in basketball, you have one foot on the ground, the other foot is moving, but the other, one foot is on the ground, one foot is moving. So in my mind, a real pivot is one where you either reuse the technology for a new application, or you reuse, or you sell something new to the same customer base, something to be the same. Sure, maybe you take the same team and you do something, but usually it's like the technology.
That's a fantastic analogy.
Yeah, or the customer is staying the same. And so we looked at potential pivots. We said, could we go into carpools? Could we go into Lyft and Sidecar were just starting to emerge as this, quote unquote pure local rideshare. It's much more of a taxi substitute, but right. It's still related into transportation. We thought about like a social, travel app where you could, talk about your trips and things like that. We even had some really crazy ideas like Uber for valet parking. So, you just press a button and somebody shows up and drives off with your car and then makes sure that you get it back to you when you want it, right? So it's like anywhere parking. I still think that's kind of an interesting idea, but, we spent 2 weeks doing this. You could tell our team was kind of uncomfortable, a little nervous. Everything is very up in the air. And at the end of 2 weeks, we kind of had a little demo day, pitch day, where different people who were excited about different ideas were kind of pitching this idea and why we should do it. And that was like on a Friday, and then we went back to our apartment over the weekend, and we were just talking, and we looked at each other and said, do you feel like any of these ideas are good ideas, right? Do we really want to go for this? If starting over, would we start a company all over again on the basis of one of these concepts? And none of the three of us could honestly say that. So then the next point was, well, $700,000 is still a lot of money. Not if you're 8 people, but if you're 3 people, it would last us for a long time. That's what some people's seed rounds are. And could we start over, right? We're not to say that our employees weren't entrepreneurial, and certainly some of them might go on to start their own companies, but at that time they were not sort of in the mindset of, I'm just ready to do anything and just go anywhere and take all these risks. That's not what they signed up for, right? They signed up to join a team to work on a product that had a vision and a market. So we made the hard decision to let go of our team, and we gave them good severance packages. We gave them the highest levels of recommendation. All of them got jobs pretty quickly, but it was so heartbreaking to do that. So we did that. So that was kind of like death part 2. Death part 1 was the cease and desist. Death part 2 was no pivot, let go of the team. Then there's the 3 of us, and we said, okay, we're gonna start over. I think in retrospect, I was the one pushing the most for the start over, because I really didn't want to do carpools. Carpools was like the only realistic option.
Right.
So, and I remember Calvin being like, "Are you sure? Do you remember how hard it was for us to pick our first thing? Do you really think we can start over?" And I was like, "Yeah, we can totally do this." And so then we did. Man, if the 3 weeks before YC were long, the months after that, where we were back in our apartment, we left our office because it was too awkward, and it was like, nobody's there now. It's just 3 of us smacked to an apartment. We released the office to somebody else, and those were some tough months. We would just talk about stuff. We would argue over things. We explored different ideas, dropped ideas, and now we didn't have the pressure. We didn't have the pressure of YC. YC being a 10-week program. Boy, you're gonna look stupid if you spent all 10 weeks just brainstorming and not doing anything, coming up with anything. But now we didn't have that pressure. I made the case that we should go somewhere else. We went to Mexico City for 10 days. We'd never been to Mexico City. We didn't really speak Spanish. Just try to think of new ideas and a new location. The only thing we came up with was that all the Spanish dictionary apps on the App Store suck. At least the ones that are $2 or whatever suck. There's probably some better way of selling international phones or 3G internationally, but no idea. This drags into January. We finally decide, we would come up with things where 2 people liked it and then the third person didn't like it. So Randy really loves quotes. If you go to his site, he has all these quotes from Emerson or Dr. Seuss, everybody. And I like quotes. I think from an athletic background, you can kind of use quotes, get yourself motivated and pumped up. And we wanted to do this site that's quote sharing and quote, you look at all the quote sites on the internet and they look like they were made in 1999 and never got updated except with a Facebook share button. And Calvin was like, I don't want to do, I don't want to do quotes. That's social media, And then Calvin and I would have these ideas where it was a marketplace for experiences. So, the obvious version of this is you're a college senior and you want to know what it's like to do a job, and you want to meet somebody who went to your school maybe and did this job, or went to your school and then went to this medical school or whatever, and maybe you would pay money to get connected to this person. Whereas Randy was like, why can't you just ask your friends? Why would people really, who would really do, So we finally decided to not split up, but just in parallel try 2 different things. Some of our investors are getting a little antsy. Some of our investors were really understanding, and they knew that they felt like the ride sharing business was not a big future, and they allowed us to explore. Some of them were more antsy, what are you doing? Maybe we should get the money back. You guys are probably just going to shut down anyway. So we had to give him something. So we finally said, okay, look, we're going to pursue 2 different paths. Jason and Randy are going to work on this quote site. Calvin is going to work on this other idea around making it easier to do charitable donations, where like extract a certain amount of money from your paycheck every month, and then maybe it would pick a charity for you, or you could see the best charities, you could see what your friends are giving to. Something. It was kind of nebulous, but it was something.
Right.
So we pitched that, and we spent some time working on it. Me and Randy actually made a site called thoughtjoy.com. It's actually up still now, and it does some things. You can make an account. You can favorite quotes and have a little quote collection. You can share those quotes at Pinterest, and they automatically get generated in an image style, which is, you see that commonly on Pinterest and Tumblr. But Calvin still didn't want to work on it. His site, like, he really spun his wheels and was kind of like doing some research, but kept changing the idea and didn't have much to show for it after a couple months. I spent a little bit of time on the side doing other things, like working on this Skillshare class on like willpower and habits, just to like keep my brain engaged. And at some point it just started getting harder and harder to stay motivated. We still had plenty of money left, but it just sucks to be going nowhere. That's what it felt like. It felt like we were going nowhere. And I have huge admiration for entrepreneurs who like change their idea multiple times and like go through all these lean times where it doesn't seem like anything's happening, because for someone who's so used to making progress all the time, it's really hard to feel like you're not making progress. And especially as an athlete, because when you are training, you have 100 reps of something, and that seems daunting, but you do it one at a time. You're making progress. You chip away at it. You do 10, you rest, you do 5. You're making progress. But when you're trying to come up with a new startup idea, it's unclear if any of the work that you're doing is actually taking you anywhere, if it's just all a big waste of time. And that can be really demotivating. So, we're really struggling. We start talking about acqui-hires, and, there weren't that many companies that Calvin and Randy and I all wanted to work for. Surprise, surprise. We didn't get into this so we could just sell out to Google or whatever and get a job at Google. I remember that we were on the phone with with Gary Tan of YC, and he was saying, look, guys, I'm reading these YC applications right now. Thousands of applications. All these people want to be you. They would kill to be you, a funded YC-backed company with a team, and you can do whatever you want. Forget what the investors want. They can't make you do anything. You can do whatever you want. And we're like, but we don't know what you want to do. It's like, just talk to some YC company. Just call them up, ask them what the problems are, fix one of those problems, get them to pay you, and find other people who will pay you to fix that problem. It's that simple. And I admire also entrepreneurs who are that mercenary, who are ready to solve any problem, who see everything as just a big opportunity. And, we couldn't get ourselves motivated to do that. And so at that point, it started becoming clear that maybe we would have to talk about winding down the company. No one of us had some idea that we really want to do so bad that we're going to like elbow out the other founders and be like, screw you guys, I'm taking this for myself, So we ultimately chose to wind down the company. So that was like the final, closure there. And we returned basically half the money we raised back to investors.
I've got to say, I feel like this Thought Joy thing is really great, though. Is it? I almost see like a Rap Genius for quotes or something like that.
Yeah, Rap Genius had this whole like annotation thing that I think it's interesting. Like saying it's the Rap Genius for X is kind of like it's taking a slick community-based approach to something that's very text-based and boring seeming previously, right?
Yeah. I like this.
It's very simple. It's not a lot of features, and there's a lot more that we wanted to do that we thought could be interesting. But, I think Randy also always felt that this was something that he would do on the side himself as a little project rather than as like a pressure venture-backed company.
Right. Oh yeah, yeah. No, and understandably. Now, when you guys were winding this thing down, you guys actually got a bunch of press. Could you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah. So actually, while we were winding down around April, so we basically stopped doing anything with RideJoy in October of 2012, and we turned off payments. So we paid everybody, we turned off payments, and we basically it was kind of irresponsible, but we kind of just stopped replying to emails. We just stopped. It was painful to look in there, man, and but the site continued to go. People would still go to it. People would find it. People would use it. And so, I think our hardcore users knew that we weren't getting any more emails, but our site probably grew, probably doubled in the year that we weren't working on it at all, right?
Interesting.
So it went from 15,000 users to 30,000 users by the time that in November, December of this year, we finally wrote a blog post and sent an email that said, "Hey guys, we're not doing this anymore." Because up until then, it was still kind of quiet. I kind of personally announced that I'd been leaving, and a lot of people didn't, ask, or some people asked, but not everyone knew what was going on, why I was, now in DC working on this other thing. And so this blog post and this email, I felt that we had to do it. We owed it to our users, and it did get picked up. I had done a talk at FailCon around that same time in October, and that eventually turned into a American Public Media Marketplace radio segment on failures. And a lot of people, I guess, shared that blog post about what we've been doing. So it's I think it's important to talk about failure, because most of the time when people are talking about failure, it's like the midway point. It's like the down part, but then there's this climax where then I started another company. Now it's all this stuff, and I'd like to be able to tell that story in the future. But I think it's important to tell the story where I am right now and not wait until I'm there, because I think you skip over things, and it's good to, and I don't know how anybody remembers things that happened to them 5 years ago, because there's so many details that just kind of evaporate. So telling it now, I think is good for me, and it's good for the ecosystem to know that not only is failure okay, and it doesn't mean that it's not the end of the world, and it doesn't also have to be linked to massive success either.
Why do you think failure is okay?
Failure is okay in the startup world when you pursue an idea, and so the facts are that most startups do not succeed. Even most venture-backed startups do not succeed. So the majority, and it depends on how you track it. There's some data out there about this, but it's a significant number of ventures do not return the capital, right? And investors know this, and they expect a few Googles and Facebooks and Heroku's or Airbnb's or Dropboxes to return the rest of the fund. While Combinator knows this, every good investor knows this. But while they're looking at things from an aggregate view and looking at a portfolio, when you're an entrepreneur, you're just one person, you're just one startup. And if your startup succeeds, that's like your whole life. Feels like your whole life. And if failure is not okay, then if every entrepreneur who started a company and then failed immediately left and never did another company again, then we would have a very, very, very small pool of entrepreneurs. It would only be if you start a company and succeed, then you get to start another company, right? And if you start and fail, then you go away, you hide, you don't start companies, you don't work for anyone. Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? And I think the best entrepreneurs, I would like to believe, and I believe that this is true, that the entrepreneurs who, or Paul Graham talks about this, like, whenever you get something, there's the people who are like for sure gonna get in to whatever program this is. They're just like way overqualified, like they're the best. And then there's like the people in the, let's say like only 10% of people get in. There's the people in the 12 to 8% like range, right? Who are all on the cusp. And then it's like these small little factors here and there that determine whether they get into the program or not, or succeed or not. And I think that a lot of startups is like, there's this band where a lot of great founders are. And I'd like to believe that I'm in that band of people who like have the right thing and like what it takes. I mean, I have a friend who works at another startup in our batch. And I won't say the name because he basically said to me, he's a good friend of mine. He went to Stanford. We worked together at the nonprofit. And he said, look, I had been beating myself up when we first, like, I was like, oh, we didn't do this right. 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 And he said, look, at the startup that I'm at now, which is doing well, like, everything that you're talking about that you did wrong, like, they've done even worse at some point, right? They screwed up hiring even worse. They screwed up sales even worse. They screwed up all these things even worse. But you just picked a bad idea. And, like, if you had picked a better idea, or if you had, like, chosen a better market or whatever, none of those things would have mattered, right? And, of course, choosing the right market is a skill. And I told him that. I said, well, at the time, we thought it was the best idea we could think of. So that still means something. But, that's what I mean, right? Like, why failure is okay, because there's so many factors that cause it to happen. It's really hard to know what you could have done differently. It's hard to know whether if you had done something else, you would have been successful, whether, bad timing played such a role. Most investors and most entrepreneurs will say that timing has a huge role to play.
That's interesting. I know we talked earlier and you kind of said, you said that, and, there are things that, you can't, that are way out of your control. And even really the idea, YC kind of gave you the RideJoy thing too, so it wasn't even really your idea.
Well, it's not that they gave us the idea, but they allowed us to continue to try new ideas until we found this one.
Right, I understand. Well, man, there are a million questions I want to ask you. I guess the last, I want to move on to writing in your book and your blog, but I do want to ask you, at your next, if you start another company, what will you do differently?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. There are a lot of things that I think I'll do differently, and it's not necessarily because I think that if I had done them this way, that I would have been successful, we would have been successful. And obviously I'm a different person now than I was when I started RideJoy, so I'm in a different set of circumstances, a different set of skills now, and different resources and beliefs. So with that disclaimer, I'll say that I think with my next company, I want to prototype the initial version myself in Rails and or in WordPress or whatever it happens to be, that you can use to prototype it in a way that you can really put it in front of customers, and maybe even close some initial customers, or at least get some sort of like indicators that, like, yes, I would buy this software if it came out, and I'm willing to sign something that even says that. I'd like to make it something that you are purchasing, and again, not because I've given up on consumer or whatever, or wish we did a B2B product the first time around, but I would just like to pursue that area, in part because I think that one thing that those types of products can benefit from is thought leadership, and from writing good content in the field that you're in. And I think that's something that I can do well, and we'll talk more about that with writing. But that would be something that I would definitely want to pursue. And I would wait some time before looking for a co-founder. And I would want to validate that idea, have that initial prototype, have some customers before I go out and start talking to potential co-founders to join me.
That's a great segue. So, as far as writing good content, what are the keys to writing good content?
So I've been writing on my blog, The Art of Ass Kicking, since late 2010, and it started out because my coworker had a blog, and he encouraged me to blog, and I said I had always felt that who am I? I'm no expert. I don't know a lot about a lot of things. I always felt that bloggers were like the types of people who were saying, well, Apple's going to do this next because of X, Y, Z reasons, or here's why Microsoft should get into this. And I'm like, how do they know that they should do that? Seems so weird. But he encouraged me to say, just write about what you're learning. And so I started writing about what I was learning at that first startup. And the first post that I did a post with a friend, Derek Flansrake, who now lives in New York City, but at the time he was in LA, but then he was in San Francisco for a while. We wrote a post called How to Get a Startup Job Out of College. And that did really well. We posted it on Hacker News, and it climbed the charts, and it was very addicting to see all these people reading it. And I think the reason why it did well was because it was useful, right? People were interested in learning how to break into startups, and learning from two college grads who had done it was something that was appealing to them. So in a lot of ways, creating great content is very much like creating great products. You have to understand who your audience is, who your user base is, who your customers are, what needs they have, what are they concerned about, what do they want, and make something that feels targeted towards them, that you can say, when you say it's like, it wasn't just breaking into startups, it's breaking into startups as a recent college grad. And we make these references to, while your friends are still, are interviewing for iBanking positions, right? Like those types of things help the reader understand that we appreciate their concerns, their life. And similarly, great products do the same thing in subtle and not subtle ways. So it starts there, I would say. I've given this talk about how to create compelling content for the web, and I talk about compelling as being sort of useful, unique, and enjoyable. I think those are and something that people feel compelled to share. So useful, we just discussed, it really applies to them. Unique is that it's something that you can't get elsewhere, right? Because if you could get it elsewhere, then why would someone come to you? If it's commodity, or if it's just this duplicate of some other place, then it's not it's not actually worth going to. If it's not enjoyable, people tend not to do things that are enjoyable, even if they're good for them, right? This is why people don't eat vegetables unless they're like deep fried or something. And enjoyable can mean it has a sense of humor, you have gifts, different things are enjoyable to different people, right? Some people are really interested in like the history of things, and so while one set of people might yawn, a different group of people might be really fascinated by the minutiae of the history of X, and you can go into that. And then compelled to share, right? Sharing is this, to get content that's out there, that really spreads. You need to make people feel like they want to share it with their network, right? Like we're so empowered to share content now across, our social networks and in emails and chats in so many different ways. But they have to do it for a reason. They have to do it because it makes them look good. It's helpful to their friends. They have this personal connection with you and they want to support you, or you're saying something that they'd like to tell other people, but they're too scared to say it, or they feel that you have expressed it more eloquently than they have, and they want to like reinforce that message. So there has to be a reason why they want to share it. But those are some of the elements of what makes great content, and great content that gets shared.
That's interesting. I like unique. I always, my kind of thought as far as writing is people always will read to learn, or people will always read to kind of be entertained, and those kind of go with useful and enjoyable. So I like unique. That's interesting. For those that are, why should someone start a blog?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually talk about this in my podcast, which I started recently called Tectonic. It's a podcast I started with Sarah Allen, who's a serial entrepreneur and software engineer, and we worked together at the Smithsonian on this Presidential Innovation Fellowship that I did in DC. And we really liked working with each other. And when we were going our separate ways, I was moving to New York and she was going to San Francisco, we said, we got to find some way to keep working together. And we decided to start a podcast. So our second podcast was on the value of blogging. And we talked about blogging from because she's also maintained a blog since 2002. It's like
she's an old school blogger.
Like she's seen through everything, right? It's pretty amazing, and she writes a lot of code on her blog, right? And it has a great following, and a lot of it is her posting snippets of code or her learning about things. And so what she said is that communication is just so important, and it's important even when you are, the most nerdy, super technical, like in the guts engineer. You need to be able to communicate, and if you're this genius engineer and no one can understand you, are you actually that genius, or is that genius ever going to actually be realized? Right, that communication is a huge part of what allows that your intelligence to be fulfilled or to become applicable. Blogging teaches you that it's hard to get your thoughts into words. Something that sounds so great in your head doesn't seem right when you put it on paper, and it's something that you have to try it over and over again to get right. So I think there's a lot of value in that. I don't think that's a very convincing reason to start a blog. I think the more convincing reason is that and someone was expressing this to me, Chris Ye, who's the VP of marketing at PBWiki, and an investor and a blogger himself, talks about blogging is like assembling a little army or a factory of soldiers that go out and fight for you, right? And they're advocating for you day and night. They never rest. They never sleep. When you go away, they're still there, talking you up, like, saying, showing the world what you're about, sharing your ideas with the world, and making you findable, right? So, my blog, just from a personal perspective, has become a huge part of my professional assets, in the sense that, your assets might be reason why someone might hire you for a job, or do a deal with you as in business in any way. It could be any number of things, right? It's the information you know about something. So you're an expert in golf, right? And we're hiring you to create this golf product or whatever. Your skills, right? Your skills in creating really great, clean CSS, JavaScript, or whatever. That's like a skill. It could be your connections, right? If you're going to be hired as a salesperson or as a BD guy, it's all about your Rolodex and like who you know. That's what you're bringing to the table. It could be all these things. My blog is one of these things that I bring to the table, right? It's like my giant dog. Like I bring it around with me. I gotta feed it all the time. It's hungry, but it's really useful, right? I use the blog to promote the work that I'm doing, right? Because of the blog, people know me who might otherwise not know me, right? And when they hear that I'm working on something or I'm talking about something, they give it more attention, or they listen to it more, right? There's a lot of reasons why having a blog for me is allowed me to be more successful than I otherwise would have been, right? It's a channel to connect with other people, right? So very recently, this will be a funny story. I read a book called Designing Products for the Web, or Product Design for the Web. It's by this guy named Randy Hunt, who is the director of product development at Etsy. And Etsy's a company in New York City. I'm considering, applying to a job there as well. But separately, I read his book. I thought it was good. He had one review on Amazon. One review, it was 5 stars, one review. I went and wrote a review for the book on Amazon, so now it's 2 reviews. And I emailed him and I said, hey, I really liked your book. I thought it was great. I noticed that you only had 1 review. Now you have 2 reviews. But would you like to do an interview with me on my blog? I've written about other books that I've read in the past, and I'd linked to 2 different blog posts that I've written that had both gotten like 100 plus tweets about on books. So I showed him that, like, this could be a great channel for you. This could be a great way for you to get your book out there. I mean, you're obviously very smart about this stuff, and you're like more credible than pretty much any other book on product design right now on the market. But people don't know about this, right? And it took a little while to get a hold of him because he's a busy guy, but he eventually agreed to his interview, and so I'm going to interview him next week. And it's because I put all that work into this that now I'm going to be talking to the guy who runs product development at a company that I'm interested in working on the product team for now. Who knows whether anything will happen because of all this, but certainly that's going to put me in a way better position than somebody randomly applying to the job out of nowhere, right? No question. There's a world of difference in that.
Interesting. So you kind of got one of your very first traffic spikes from a Y Combinator post.
A post on Hacker News.
A post on Hacker News. I guess, how do people, how will people that are just starting out get traffic? How will they, get people to read what they're writing?
Yeah. So one of the things that you do early on, I mean, it depends on what kind of writing you're trying to do. If you're trying to do writing for your company blog, then there's probably a focus. There's probably influencers in the community that matter. So I read an article by this guy who'd written a book about like the education of millionaires. He'd done a guest post on like Tim Ferriss.
Michael Ellsberg.
Yeah,
I love that book.
Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. So he says, here's what you do, right? To break it into a new field, read the 10 most important books in this field, write notes about those books, write them as blog posts. Doesn't matter. You don't have to promote them. Just put them up on the blog. Next, reach out to someone who's influential in the industry and say, look, I'm starting a blog about this stuff. They can see that you've already written about 10 different books that are the books on the industry. You're serious. You do the interview. They help you promote it. Once you get the first person, then you get the next person. You do an interview site. I got to see your site, and I got to see you do interviews with all these people. People I've heard of, people I like. I'm like, man, I need to go back and listen to this one. It's gonna, I have like 5 hours of backlog now to like listen to here. Thanks. But right, and each one builds on the next one. So I think interviews is a great way to do it. Even if you don't interview them, you can ask them for advice as you start this out, and later you can sort of show them how far you've come, and they become your supporters, and they share it. Guest posting, well, now with all the news with Matt Cutts and guest posting and SEO, I still think that they're not going to punish high quality guest posts, right? There's obviously op-eds that happen on New York Times, and they're really good guest posts out there. I think they're really just trying to eliminate the like very automated, robotic articles that are out there. But writing for other people's site, something that I'm trying to do more of this year to grow my audience. So those are all things that you can do to help. And then if your site is tech oriented, Hacker News can be a great source. If it's not, there's probably a subreddit that you could go into and find, and even if it's small, that's even better because it means it's more targeted and you're not competing with as many people. So that's subreddits are a great way to focus your content and share it with a specific group of people who are very likely to be interested.
Yeah, the Google thing is pretty interesting. I know I get like a dozen of those emails a week. I'm sure you probably get like a million of them.
Yeah.
It is interesting. I think the value of guest posts is really kind of, it's for other people to discover you. If it's not passing page rank juice, or I know we're getting a little more technical as far as
Sure.
SEO goes, but I really think that the value of posting on another blog is you're exposing yourself to other audiences and things like that.
Yeah.
I've been writing for several years too, and I'm actually in the process of redoing my kind of personal site. Anecdotally, I look back on a lot of my old writing, and I am, I'm honestly kind of embarrassed about the quality of it. Do you feel that about a lot of your early posts?
Yeah, I mean, when I was putting together Winning Isn't Normal, I was going back into the archives and picking up some of the articles that had been popular but early on in my career, and I had a friend looking through it, and she would point out certain words that I was using that were just really kind of sounded goofy now. Like I wouldn't end sentences properly, or it was much more conversational, and sometimes you're like, oh God, this is kind of awkward. This is so like childish, right? I remember for many years I refused to keep a diary because whenever I read my old diary entries, I'm like, I hate the person who was writing this. Why would I do this? So yeah, I think that's a natural thing. I mean, everyone, the famous Ira Glass quote about how it takes time for your skill to catch up to your taste. Although sometimes I'm pleased with myself, and then I'm like, is my taste not good? Because I think this is good now.
I feel like it's like it's like fine wine. I'm not gonna lie, I love cheap red wine. I think it's fine, but a lot of to people that do have that taste, that have been drinking red wine so long, their tastes are so distinguished. They can look back and say, I can't believe you're drinking that, or things like that.
Yeah, I have this theory that actually everyone experiences on average an equal amount of pleasure and pain from these types of experiences. So if you're a novice wine drinker, you put the best wine in the world in front of you, and it's just like, okay, it's pretty good, like, but you put the worst wine, you're like, yeah, it's not that good, that's not my favorite, but you're not, and then for someone who is a wine connoisseur, it's like so exquisitely amazing, but it's also awful, and just so the highs are higher, the lows are lower, and I feel this way about gymnastics, right? Because when I go to a gymnastics meet, it's a very different experience from when my friend goes to it. When I go with a friend, their experience is very different from mine. I'm watching this and I'm going, oh my God, his toes aren't even together, like it's so sloppy, this guy, he has terrible line, he has all these things. And my friend's like, how many twists did he do? I couldn't tell if it was one or two. I can't even keep track. And then I'm like, oh my God, that was amazing. He's like, it just looked like a lot of flips. They all look like a lot of flips,
That's funny. There's a show that hasn't been posted yet with Jacob Henneman, and he does film production. He's like a creative director. He was talking about going to film school. He felt like it's completely plausible for someone to go to film school and never know how to enjoy another movie again. Because like you're always looking, how did they do these different cuts? You're like dissecting everything, and your tastes are just so cultivated for the specific high art that not every movie is meant to be like that.
You have to know when to turn it on and when to turn it off, right? You have to know when to relax and just enjoy things, and when to turn it on and be really critical and really sharp about why, how this could be improved.
And that's exactly what Jacob said. That's how you survive film school and still can come out and enjoy a movie.
Yeah.
Kind of back to writing. Do you have a routine that you follow? Do you write so many words each morning, or?
No. Right now, I've been moving around a lot. I just traveled to Peru, and before that I was, in Boston, and then before that I was in DC for a while. So I don't have a routine. I would say that I get pretty antsy if I don't if I don't write for a while. I was gonna say work out because that's also true. That if I don't work out for a while, I get really antsy. So it's almost like this itch that needs to be scratched. So that's like a good sign to me. It's like it's a habit. I mean, partly I feel it's a sense of pressure to keep writing things. There are people who are on an email list who I don't know if they expect things, but I have a personal feeling of like, oh, it's been so many days and I haven't written something. I need to like write something, and I usually just have posts sort of bubbling in my head, so it's not too bad. But once I get settled in my own apartment in New York, I'd like to get into a little bit more of a rhythm. For a while, I was on a rhythm where I'd wake up in the morning. Before I started my startup, I would write in the morning before work.
That's when I write.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your trip to Peru. You're doing a lot of traveling. You go to Peru. What was the thought behind that? What did you do when you got there?
It was, I wouldn't call it a last minute trip, but I was talking to a friend of mine, Mark Bao, who was the CTO of OnSwipe and now going back to college after like dropping out and doing startup stuff for a while. He was like, he'd been traveling for like a year, like abroad, backpacking and stuff. And I was saying, I never did that. I never did the pre-college trip, the post-college trip. I was always like studying or working. He said, man, you got to do it. You got to experience this. It's, and I kept saying like, well, why? What's so good about traveling solo, right? And backpacking, all this stuff. And he said, you really learn more about yourself, and it's just he just convinced me. I don't know exactly what he said, but he really convinced me that this would be a worthwhile thing to do, not just because it'd be fun and exciting and enjoyable, but because it would give me something that would enhance my life. And so I booked this 12-day trip, which isn't that long, but to me it's long. First solo trip, longest trip in a while. Most of my trips are like 9 days, like 2 weekends in a week. And I went to Lima, which was like in Peru. It's the capital city, but Peru's a pretty big country, and there's a lot of different places to go. And so people were like, "You have to go to Machu Picchu." I'm like, "Oh, is that where Machu Picchu is? It's in Peru." And so I flew to another city and then went up to Machu Picchu. I don't speak a lot of Spanish. I learned some Spanish along the way. Learned half of it in Mexico City. Right, Joy, and then the other half now in Peru. And but it was I guess one thing that was good is the first time I felt kind of a little bit of anxiety and fear in a while, because as an entrepreneur, I feel that I do things that might seem risky to other people, but it's really just that I feel that I have the control and the ability to accomplish my tasks. But when you go into another country, I was anxious. I didn't speak the language. I didn't know if the things that I could do, like were good at, would be helpful, right? If you can't communicate with somebody, then it doesn't matter how smart you are, really. I mean, to the degree that you can get your message across, yeah. But right, there's a similar conversation we were having about engineers and not being able to like communicate their intelligence if you can't get your message across. So there's a little bit of fear in that, but it ended up working out okay. I did a lot of things last minute, and that worked out okay. I mean, a little scary, but it was always fine. You had to like be aware of your surroundings a lot more. You had to be more present because you couldn't count on anybody else to do something for you. You couldn't check your phone all the time. I'm not a big like I have to unplug and whatever. I check my phone all the time, but I do think I keep it under control. But this trip just I think one of the other things is that so beyond this like this anxiety about coping and survival was around your own preferences. When you're not with somebody else, it's really up to you what you want to do. Do you want to stay in the hostel? Do you want to go out? Do you want to go surfing? Do you want to go running? Do you want to go into the downtown and do whatever? There's all these options, and it's up to you to decide. And it helps you gain confidence in yourself that you know what you like. I think it's important to know what you like and what you want. even if you're not doing it all the time, you have to know. And it's almost like you have to test, right? You're like, I think that if I go out and do this today, I'll enjoy it. And then you find out if you were right or not. Sometimes you're not right. You're like, oh, actually, this wasn't that fun. But you learn, right? And then so I think it's important to have a good sense of what you want in any given situation, and the more accurate you can be about predicting what you actually want, the better. And so this was in some ways a good training ground for practicing making a selection that you think is what you want and finding out if you were right.
Do you plan on taking other trips like this by yourself?
Yeah, I think I'd like to. I think it was fun. I think it'd be worth doing more trips in the future. I don't know exactly when I would do that.
And was this the first trip that you took by yourself?
Yeah.
Very cool. I think that's awesome.
Have you done any solo travel?
I haven't done any solo travel. As you were talking, I couldn't help but, kind of understand what you were saying. I wasn't in another country, but when I left Atlanta to go out to California to work at Dr. Chrono, I didn't know anybody there. I didn't know anybody in the Bay Area, so that was like a new thing. And then when I moved to Chicago to go to the Starter League and to learn web development, I moved to Chicago without having a place to live.
Yeah.
Naively expecting my lease to end in the winter, which nobody's lease ends in the winter out there.
Yeah.
And I was living with Joe Villanueva, a great guy. He ended up being my roommate, but I had never met this guy before. He's this 30-year-old guy from California, and and that was the first time I'd ever set foot in the Midwest, and it was really interesting learning experience because we were expecting to just quickly find an apartment, maybe a few days, and it was like 2 weeks, and we barely got an apartment. We actually ended up getting this 1-bedroom high-rise apartment that was like super nice, granite countertops, things like that. It was unfurnished, so we were using like these $35 fold out 6-foot fold out tables that we bought from Target, and like these $10 steel chairs, and we were sleeping on the floor, which I know this sounds weird, but I honestly have never slept so good my entire life. I don't know if it's because I was so tired or if the floor actually, felt that good, but I slept, incredibly well. But it was, that for me, that's the only thing I can think of to relate to that. And so now I'm in Mobile, Alabama, and I know some people that are from here, but they're in Atlanta, in New York, and Colorado. The only person I knew down here when I was moving here that was still here was actually a girl that I met when I was in Chicago, who's the one who actually, kind of asked me to come, work at the place I'm working at now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my experience. But I've thought about doing a trip, a kind of a solo trip like that.
Totally worth it. Yeah, totally. A lot of places in South America, you don't need to speak that much Spanish. It's pretty affordable if you can get a good flight. Once you're out there, it's like hostels are like $10 a night. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I may be emailing you with a few questions here later.
Yeah, totally.
I guess let's kind of go back and talk about your writing, and specifically, we've talked a bunch about your blog, but let's talk a little bit about your book. What prompted you wanting to write a book?
So I felt that it was kind of like a snowball process. I was thinking that, a friend of mine said, you should probably, when people sign up for your email newsletter, which I have, and it gives you some exclusive content as well as new posts in your inbox, and I think it's a great thing to offer to people who are interested in my stuff. You should offer like a drip email campaign where you send them like your 5 best posts or like 10 best posts or something over time, so they get a sense of what you're writing as well as getting the new stuff. And I thought that was like a good idea, and then I started looking at like what I would include as my list, And then I started adding more and more posts to the list. And I'm like, this is untenable. And I want to like send them like 30 articles.
Your 30 best articles.
Yeah, my 30 best articles. It's gonna take you, 2 months to like get them. And then I was thinking, well, maybe I could do something more with this, right? And that's when I started thinking about publishing it, because there was a lot of content there. I mean, the book is like over 50,000 words, right? That's a lot of content. Sometimes I write really long blog posts, and I've always wanted to write books, and I hope in the future to write some books that are published like by a publisher. Even though the amount of money you're getting is less and they don't do a lot of the work, I think there's still a lot of value there. So I thought that this would be a good bridge. This would allow me to explore what it's like to try to market a book through my own blog, just purely on my own sort of like energy and terms, and go through that process and see what it's like. And so I put together the book. I was going to work with an illustrator at one point, but then she kind of got overcommitted and had to step back. But then, I designed a bunch of things myself. And so those are the reasons why I wanted to do it. And I do think I learned a lot. And I also think that actually I've been surprised that the Amazon SEO is not very good. If you search my name, it's not like my book comes up in the first 2 pages even, I don't think. But it is there. It is on Amazon. And, now there are 10 reviews and it's 4.5 stars. So I think that, like my blog, this is a great asset to have in my career. It's something that you can give. My dad was very badgered me until I made a print edition, which was like more work. The digital edition is pretty easy because like all the formatting kind of just like handles itself.
Right.
When you do a print edition, you have to worry about margins and like resolution and all these things. Finally, I did it over winter break, and he was like, print a bunch of copies, and then he was like, give them to people. And I realized that it's a little self-serving, but it makes a good gift,
Yeah.
to somebody. And he's like, hey, I wanted you to have this book that I wrote.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. You mentioned that you want to go through a traditional publisher and that you thought there was value there. What do you think that value is going through a traditional publisher?
It's all about credibility at the end of the day. The reason why people write, books are a medium to transmit an idea in physical form. Magazines to some degree do this. But books have been around for a really long time, and they will continue to be around for a really long time. They hold their form incredibly well, and a book over a blog post or even like a carefully written magazine article really is preserves itself over time quite well, and a publisher. So a lot of books are still being bought through bookstores. At the end of the day, there's still lots of bookstores in America, and people walk into bookstores and they see things and they buy things. So it makes publishers really help with getting you in a bookstore, and that's the only way that you're gonna be able to get on something like a New York Times bestsellers list or something like that. So I definitely want to write a book that goes through a traditional publisher, so it goes into the bookstores, so it can make its way onto the charts. I would like to, reach some kind of bestseller, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, best-selling list, and that your book is like your calling card. Someone used to put it. Your book is the new business. Your book is the new business card. And Chris Ye, who I was talking about earlier, who was talking about words, he said that he's working on a book. He just actually finished the manuscript, so they're doing the first round of revisions, I guess. And he said after having done this first book, it was a lot of work, more work than I expected. But from now until the rest of my life, I'm gonna always be working on a book, because nothing gets people to talk to you more than when you sit down and you tell them, listen, so I'm working on this book, and then, whatever else you want to say, as long as it's relevant to the book content and that person, people are flattered. People want to be in books, right? Again, there's that value of being in the book or being interviewed for a book. Even getting background information for a book, it feels good. And so, again, like a blog, there's a lot of value in writing books, in being in the process of writing a book, and it's something that I want to do.
I guess before your current book, which is out right now, like when you do sign up for your site, I signed up for it, and you get like the guide to YC, a couple of your posts that were on Hacker News Monthly, and like the 7 unorthodox strategies for winning. Were those kind of like precursors to your latest book?
Yeah, Guide to YC was like a book. It was like a mini book in and of itself. It started as a series of notes in Google Docs that I was writing up for friends who were applying to Y Combinator, because I kept saying the same thing over and over again, and then finally wrote it down. And then one of my friends was running this publishing thing called Hyperink, and said that like we'll publish it. And so they ended up helping me sort of like do the formatting, so I didn't have to do that stuff, and made it look nice, and published it. I mean, we gave it away for free because I really didn't want to give off the impression that I was trying to like monetize my like YC experience. That wasn't going to be very valuable. And thousands of people have downloaded it. So, I think that's great for me. A lot of people reach out to me saying that they've read the Guide to YC. It's definitely kind of like a precursor to this book. I mean, this book is a large collection of writings that I've already done elsewhere, but a lot of editing went into so sort of like I didn't have to do any new writing, but I did have to like rewrite a lot of my stuff. Especially like as we said, over time you're in different places and you want to kind of make that writing consistent.
Right.
But yeah, I think everything comes. Actually, in college, I also published a book called The Stanford Spirit. I got 32 Stanford students to respond to these prompts of like I remember, I live for, and I would like to, and then they kind of filled in the blank, and got a like range of really interesting books, and somehow convinced the bookstore to like buy 50 copies off me, and they like sold them at the bookstore. So like I have this check for like $300, it was like pretty awesome. I also convinced them to give me like $100 worth of gift cards to like give away for free to encourage people to like submit this stuff. So like, I mean, in some ways you could see that entrepreneurial spirit pretty early on. Like that was before Gumball Capital. That was like an individual entrepreneurial experience, and in like over the course of 1 year, going from like, hey, I think it'd be cool if I like made this thing, to, bam, here's this box of books that somebody else has paid to like put in their store. Like that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I definitely think so.
Are you writing a book? Are you working on a book? You should be.
There might be a book in the process.
You probably have enough interviews now to be writing a book from it. How many interviews have you done?
Probably 20 something. So
That's a lot.
Yeah, I've been doing them off and on for a pretty good while, and even before this, I was doing interviews. I was basically doing exactly what we're doing now, like just calling up people saying, "Hey, you need to talk to this guy." It just wasn't recording it. So,
do you transcribe this yourself?
Oh man.
I hope not. I hope you're not.
This one may be a little bit different. I may have to pick and choose the questions. So, I guess this is my turn to tell a story. So I've experimented like with a ton of different things. The format and stuff has changed. I've tried to have these transcribed several times. Like the first, 2 or 3 I did. I tried to I went on Craigslist and I was like, I'll pay someone, whatever, 75 cents a word or a minute to transcribe this. And I had like 3 people say yeah, and then I sent them the basically the video, and then like never got an email back from them.
Yeah.
And that happened again and again and again. I was like, all right, maybe I need to just do a professional transcription service. And they did a fantastic job, but it was like, there's a certain amount that people will actually want to read, and usually I try and keep these between like 2,000 and 4,000 words. A lot of it is lengthy, but a lot of what I do is paraphrase. But when you transcribe a 30-minute interview and get 12,000 words back, it's more difficult to edit that down than it is to paraphrase to 2,000 or 3,000 words, 2,000 or 4,000 words. So a lot of what I do is write it and try and write it and make sense of what people are saying. People kind of chain sentences on together, and there's the way people talk isn't really the best way for them to read. So what
starts and stops.
Yeah, I try and make it without changing the meaning of what they're saying, or if there's like a quote that I do, occasionally I do pull quotes. If there's a quote, I try not to change it, but it's impossible. Like right now, we've been talking for a pretty long time. This is going to be one of the longer interviews, but yeah. I think there's still valuable stuff here, so we'll keep going.
I got to hop in a few actually, but
all right.
That's this has been very fun. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's. I guess I've just got kind of a few other questions.
Sure.
Let's talk about your podcast for a second. So you are starting a podcast.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about it.
So the podcast is called Tectonic, and we really, Sarah and I are superficially different in a lot of ways. So she's Caucasian. I'm Chinese, Asian American. She's a female. I'm a male. She's a mom. I'm single. She's come from a CS, software engineering, 3D graphics artist kind of background. I come from an athletic background, more of marketing and sales. That's how I got into sort of tech startups. So on the superficial level, we have a lot of differences, but we have a lot of similarities. But we also care about some of the same issues. We care about, making great software. We care about treating people well, about, leadership, about making things happen. And, we come at things from different angles. And so I think that makes for good discussion. I think that makes for interesting discussion when we sort of come at things from different angles. And so the tagline is making innovation work in business, software, and life. It's pretty broad, but I still think that the making innovation work part is really the key there, is that there are, we were these presidential innovation fellows at the Smithsonian, and so the phrase innovation was almost like a joke, because it's like, yeah, sprinkle some innovation on that, like it gets a little ridiculous, but that there's always a better way to do things, I think is at the heart of innovation, and that it takes work to implement new ideas, but that can be fruitful. So it's just us talking, and we pick different topics. We've talked about hackathons and APIs, which was related to the Smithsonian hackathon we did. We talked about blogging. We did a end of the year 2013 tech trends. So flat design, wearables, open data, all that stuff. We just recorded an episode on race and gender. So I was like, man, you're ready to go. You just want to jump in there. She's been quite an advocate for women in tech, and co-founded an organization called Rails Bridge, which helps women and minorities get into technology. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. We're just getting started, so we're trying to figure out the best way to track if anybody cares, to track where people are coming from, what makes them interested in the usage and things like that. But it's been a lot of fun so far.
Well, I guess, kind of what can we expect in future episodes, and, where do you see it going?
Yeah. I'd like to get some guests on the show. One of the things that we didn't do in our top 10 tech trends was talk about Bitcoin or NSA. I think NSA is a little politically touchy, but at least Bitcoin, I think, is both of us just don't really understand it. And so we'd like to bring an expert onto the show, and I think that would be great if we could do that. We have in future podcasts we want to talk about marketing. I think we'll probably spend some time talking about learning how to code, or why it's important to learn how to code. We might talk about job hunting in the tech sector and how do you do that. I'm doing that right now. She doesn't need to do that anymore, but is also looking for things and figuring out again. So thinking about ways that can be successful. So I think there's a lot of great topics that we could cover, and so that's a taste of some of the things we've been talking about.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to listening to them.
Thank you.
Last question, then I'll let you go. If there's one piece of advice you could give to people watching, what is it?
Who's watching?
Entrepreneurs, designers, mostly people that are young, starting out.
I would say that we have a tendency to believe that other people act and think in ways that are similar to ourselves, and even when we recognize that they are different, we are often bad predictors of anticipating how other people might think and feel with a given product, a given message, a given anything. And so it is on us to spend a lot of effort and energy really trying to understand other people, where they're coming from, where they're at, and what they care about and what matters to them, and not make assumptions that they are like us, because it is likely that they are not like us in important ways. And when we understand that, that's when we can be really effective with them in being persuasive and convincing them to try something, to do something, to work with you, to anything. And so that's my advice.
It's great. Jason, where can people follow you?
You can check out the blog at jasonshen.com. I'm on Twitter at Jason Shen. Pretty much Jason Shen everywhere is probably me. And then the podcast you can find at tectonicpodcast.com. Winning Isn't Normal is on Amazon and available for Kindle. If you don't have a Kindle, you probably have an iPhone or an Android. You can read it on the free Kindle app there. If you don't have a smartphone, you can still read it on the web at read.amazon.com. So there's no reason why you can't read this content. I do not accept the excuse of I don't have a Kindle. But those are the main places, and of course you'll probably be watching this episode on signaltower.co. So yeah.
Well, thank you. I know this was a long interview, but I think there's a lot of really great stuff here, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out. This is great.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody, that's our show today. I know it went a little bit long, but I thought Jason had a lot of really good points and a lot of good things to say. As usual, you can reach out to me at Signal Tower, at Samuel R. Solomon on Twitter. If you're not a subscriber to Signal Tower, please go to signaltower.co and hit the big blue subscribe button. That's it. Thanks for watching.